By now, just about everyone normal knows that the continued audits and investigations into the 2020 election are pure political theater in service of pushing the big lie about fraud. And now there is new exclusive audio that shows even the investigators themselves know that they're engaging in a sham. NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard obtaining recordings from state election investigators from the Attorney General's office in Arizona, who are still investigating the 2020 election. More than a year later, on the tapes, the investigators tell Adrian Fontes, a former election official in Maricopa County, that not only do they not believe the 2020 election was stolen, they also might not really know how elections work either. Take a listen.
I mean, is your boss that desperate in his primary that he's got to push this narrative about a stolen election?
Well,
I mean, why are you guys
nobody's talking about a stolen election at all.
But then why are you... I mean, that's what this is about. At the end of the day, this is a false narrative. It's been proven false over and over again. We know it's not real. I have a feeling that you guys know it's not real. And I kind of feel bad that you guys are even here, because I get the feeling from body language and stuff that you guys know this is and I'm really sorry that you have to do it, but I'm happy to answer the question.
You have to think of it this way. Like when I worked at the police department, okay? Somebody comes in and makes a complaint. Mm-hmm. We investigate it, okay?
Have you had a chance to look at, like, the early voting plan, the election day plan, and all that stuff from the county recorder's office and election department?
I'm gonna be perfectly honest with you about how this has worked. I volunteered for some reason I'll never understand to be the election integrity investigator at the AG's office. It's a new thing. It's a new thing. We didn't have it before.
We didn't have it before because we have a lunatic losing candidate who refused to concede. Explain to everyone who these two people are and the significance of that tape.
Adrian Fontes is the former Maricopa County recorder who is overseeing that election in Maricopa County. He, along with the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors, including several Republicans who have continued to stand up and say this was a fair election, conducted righteously, and this was a fair election.
And there was no fraud.
It's not fraud.
And Joe Biden won.
Joe Biden won. Then you have that individual who is a special agent from Attorney General Mark Brnovich's office, who is part of this election integrity unit here that is now investigating the 2020 election. This was just from earlier this month, a whole year later, essentially coming in after the Cyber Ninja audit was conducted and looking to, in their version, right, work through some of those outstanding questions that the Attorney General, per the elections integrity unit official there, that they say that are still outstanding.
There aren't any outstanding questions.
Attorney General Mark Brnovich is running for the U.S. Senate. Blake Masters, who is another Republican candidate for the U.S. Senate, was just at Mar-a-Lago 2 weeks ago. Mark Brnovich was essentially pummeled by President Trump over Twitter and in statements for not doing enough to investigate this election. We've got a longer snippet. This was an hour-long interview in which the special agent was there with Adrian Fontes. If we could take a listen to a little bit more of it.
Absolutely.
So obviously you know about the audit.
That was almost air quotes.
It was. So the audit, you know, the audit came out. Cyber Ninjas conducted the audit, and so there's been a lot of controversy over just different issues. And so all we're trying to do is get an idea, because Bill and I, we've never worked election stuff, and don't really know a lot of the processes. That's just the paper ballots, correct?
Well, that's the only kind there are.
Okay. Well, I mean, people voting at the machines later on.
I don't know what you mean by that.
If I walk into a ballot place, do they do electronic voting at all?
No.
Okay, so everything's a paper ballot.
Yes.
Okay. I'm a little confused.
Well, I'm a little surprised.
Well, because
like, I'm literally a little bit surprised and disappointed at the nature of that question.
Right.
Like, you don't know that in Arizona, every vote is on a paper ballot? There's no such thing as a voting machine in Arizona.
Okay.
The fact that you're using that term is really disturbing.
Right. So my understanding is at some point, either shortly before the election or shortly after, some of the information that came in through ballots, and I don't know if it's scanning or how they tabulate. I'm not a computer person.
So you know how information gets into that server, right?
No.
Okay, well, it would be helpful for you to have that background before.
So the only place that there were questions raised about Arizona's voting machines was in right-wing disinformation. And it's so pervasive that it misinformed the investigator. How does this even continue to go on?
Exactly. I think that's the heart of this question. I reached out to the Attorney General of Arizona's office there. They said they have no comment at this time here. But this is clearly them working through potential indictments here. We're talking about the Attorney General of Arizona here. Ultimately, it would go to the court of law, right? Somebody would have to actually be found guilty for wrongdoing. But we just lived through that for months of the cyber ninjas working through this year. But when you look at these candidates, every single one of those candidates for governor in the state of Arizona are questioning the 2020 election. You have the U.S. Senate candidates, Blake Masters. You have Mark Brnovich now, who is conducting his own investigation with the official office here. And what you just heard was a special agent there. I'm not inside of his mind, but clearly we all heard what his questions were there, and seemingly not knowing the basics of Arizona elections, including the fact that elections are conducted on paper ballots in the state.
Rick, the bad guys are winning. I mean, this is someone who seems to not have any ill intentions that I can hear on an audio recording, but he doesn't have the basic facts about an election he's been brought in to investigate after 3 audits and the cyber ninja fraud it. What breaks a cycle of disinformation, again, so pervasive that an entire election is being waged based on a lie?
It's scary, Nicole. I mean, it's the authoritarian's playbook, which comes from Alice in Wonderland, which is verdict first, evidence afterwards. There was the story in the Arizona papers today about Trump and Giuliani calling right after the election, trying to find more than 10,000 votes to overturn what happened there. And there's been a year audit where there was no damage. But since every candidate in Arizona, Republican candidate, is disputing the validity of the election, that evidence doesn't matter. That's the problem, and that's what's so dangerous in our politics now, where there's no empirical fact that one side accepts. And when you can't have acceptance of facts in a democracy, that's when a democracy, as we were saying, votes itself out of existence. It's really frightening.
Jackie, do any of the Republicans in the Arizona congressional delegation want to give up their seats because they're so concerned that there was fraud in the 2020 elections?
Absolutely not. And I think we need to take a closer look here at someone like Brnovich. He was one of the few attorney generals in a swing state who stood up against President Trump. He went on Fox News in November 2020 and said there was no signs of election fraud, that we were not able to determine that anything affected anyone's vote, is what I'm reading him a block quote from that interview, and that there were 100% that there weren't any statistical anomalies or errors. This is a guy who is now pushing this investigation for strictly political reasons. He was castrated by President Trump, castigated by him on Twitter and through emails targeted by him. And now he's trying to win a primary to become a U.S. senator to represent Arizona. And that is the only reason why he's going back on his initial statements defending the Arizona election. And I think that this is a pattern that we're seeing over and over again. I'd actually be curious if we went and looked at some of the other attorneys general who defended, Republican ones who defended President Trump in 2020, and see just how they've shifted in that way too, now that they've come under such scrutiny and attack for not embracing these false claims.